tender black-eyed peas, collard greens simmering with savory ham hocks, crispy fried chicken with golden cornbread straight out of the oven. Can you almost taste it? Yeah, I can practically hear your stomach through the screen. Mm-hmm. Black food. It has the power to stir up hunger and nostalgia at a single glance, don't it? And yet, despite its undeniable flavor and appeal, why does our beloved food so often get a bad rap? Look, I'm Darren from Push Block, and you're tuned into Black History Year. Through every trial and tribulation, our ancestors found nourishment in times when nourishment wasn't easy to come by. But somewhere along the way, their stories and recipes got lost in stereotypes and misinformation that led some Black folk to turn away from our rich food culture. So I'm here to set the record straight with today's incredible guest, the incomparable Michael Twitty. Now, Michael is a renowned culinary historian, educator, and author of the James Beard Award-winning book, The Cooking Gene, and Kosher Soul. He brings a bevy of intersecting identities to the plate, and we can't wait to dig into the expansive food knowledge he provides. So get ready for an episode that may leave you hungry, but trust, we've got the recipes that'll bring you closer to your people, your ancestors, and yourself. What's up, fam? Before we dive into the episode, I have one small favor to ask. Please spread the word about Black History Year on social media. Podcasting is competitive, y'all, and the best way to grow is through your promotion. You can shout out this episode or share one lesson from it you found super interesting. Just tag us at We Are Push Black on Instagram and TikTok so more folks can access the Black history they didn't teach us in school. Your support means the world to us, and your minute of effort makes our hours of work worth it. So thank you, fam. Now, let's get back to the show. So, Michael, the way that we like to open up our conversations here at Black History Year, we want to know from our guests, what does Black liberation look like to you?
Okay. Black liberation looks like to me. What does it look like to me? It looks like us being able to state now and forever that we are not orphans of the West or Africa. We are both. We can hold space for being our own thing, but also being children of Africa and being Africans. I was raised that way, and I believe that way. I'm gonna die that way. That we are an African people, and also that we're a sovereign people. We never agreed to this.
Yes.
We never signed a paper saying, "Thanks for kidnapping us," or you have license to do with us what you will. So we are still a sovereign people, and as we are a sovereign people and an African people living outside of Africa, we're also uniquely our own ethnicity, our own peoplehood. And liberation to me means owning that, understanding those boundaries and lines, but also definitions and empowerments, and living in that truth.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thank you so much for that rich response. It really touches upon some of the themes that we'll get into in today's conversation, particularly notions of identity, cultural heritage, and really how history and how we understand that history really relates to how we understand ourselves, that sovereignty you spoke of. And really, one of the goals of this conversation is to think through how do we reclaim these traditions that have been kind of taken away from us as it relates to our culinary heritage. So thank you for laying that groundwork, Michael. Really appreciate you. Well, before we dive deep into the history, I just want to know, are there any historic Black recipe books that really light you up, that you return to over and over again? Here, I'm thinking about, maybe things like Dick Gregory's Natural Diet for Folks Who Eat, or Intozaki Shange's If God Can Cook, You Know I Can. Yeah, anything like that you return to?
Yeah, those are really important contemporary texts because there's also Vertimer Grosvenor, so many other writers, even Maya Angelou, Mahalia Jackson. I mean, other people worked in food, have recorded. Pearl Bailey, the cookbook.
Whoa.
There are hundreds. There are actually hundreds. But the thing about it is that most of these things happen after the popularization of Black foodways in probably between the 1940s and 50s onward. One of the first television food personalities why am I blanking right now? But um, was a black woman from Louisiana, New Orleans, and yeah, you're right. I can see her face and everything, and that was like before there was a Julia Child, right? And the
Mm-hmm.
very fact that she had a show, and by the way, y'all forgive me right now because I've got a lot of stuff in my mind, but I know this woman's face and name in my brain. It's right there. It's one of our saints. But it's what's interesting is that we were in the background for so long, and people ask me like when I do my interpretation of enslaved foodways, the different plantations and farms and historical sites, like where are the recipes coming from? And I'm like, well, I have to do the work of excavation.
Mm.
Part of it, what was the most defining factor of our ancestors' lives in terms of history? They weren't allowed to record them.
Mm.
We were the only group in American history that had compulsory illiteracy on pain of death. That's why I look at this current nonsense we're living through, and I'm going. They had to go back to their prehistoric racism,
Yeah.
right? Because I mean, like we were told, don't you? I mean, when I, you're combing through these, the Works Projects Administration did all these interviews with
Oral
formerly enslaved
history.
black people, and they were generally kids or teenagers during antebellum slavery. A very few were actually like full
Hey.
grown adults who lived to tell the story. Those people would have been very very old in 1930. But I guess the point I'm trying to make is um, we didn't have the ability or the right or the license to record our own lives,
Mm.
and certainly did not record recipes in the way that Europeans did. There was no need to because of the family structure. But then again, okay, what's coming next. The family structure
Mm-hmm.
was
Mm-hmm.
decimated. The average African American human being was sold 2 to 3 times in their lifetime by the time antebellum slavery hit its swing, which means almost every one of our families was broken up in somewhere at some point. If they were lucky, they could be sold together.
Mm.
But typically, that did not include the father and the children. It was usually the mother, if that at all. I have an
Mm.
ancestor who was sold away from his mother and father at the age of 8 or 9, and was walked all the way from Virginia to Alabama. Had been born in North Carolina. So now that we know this, we have to ask the question: what were the recipes? How were they passed down? Who is creating that literature? So for me personally, to answer your question, Edna Lewis, for example, I know Edna Lewis gets a lot of like posthumous, celebration, which is very typical for Black women, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
When you dead, then you can be read.
Yes.
But the reality is, Edna Lewis was living in around until 2006, and I was fascinated by her before she caught on to some, cause celebre. And it's because Edna Lewis wrote a cookbook that was based on one, the seasons.
Hmm.
Two, it was that she's talking about, she was from Virginia. My paternal grandmother was from Virginia. So these are Black people who never got sold out of Virginia. You see what I'm saying? There's a
Ah.
certain lineage, right,
Yeah.
and family tree there, and a power to never having left,
Mm-hmm.
the first colony where you were brought. And so, she talked a lot about, not things that you and I, so when I think about Black food, soul food, the common thing, and we have to explain to somebody else, we'd be like, okay, there's some greens, some collard greens, some mustard greens, there's macaroni and cheese and sweet potatoes and this and that. Okay, great. Not
Mm-hmm.
everybody had those things. In fact, look at Edna Lewis' cookbook, no mention of collards, okay? Because soul food, our vernacular cuisine,
Mm-hmm.
is colloquial and discretionary, which means that it depends on where you from, who you with. I was 40 something years old before I learned about catfish and spaghetti.
So I'm actually based here in Louisiana, Baton Rouge specifically. And you mentioned catfish, like because of the Catholic history here, catfish is served every Friday in Southern Louisiana, but red beans served on Mondays here. But a lot of that has to
Correct.
do with just very specific Louisiana history. I didn't know above the Mason-Dixon line there were black folks eating catfish and spaghetti. I actually want to toss out a few somewhat light questions. Don't want to start any diaspora
Sure.
wars here,
Sure.
but myself included, my producers, we have some pressing questions around certain black food dishes. Just
Come
got to
on.
know your thoughts here. So something that comes up a lot for black people is not messing with other people's potato salad. Where does that come from? That specific history? You think it's just nostalgia? People just saying like, "Oh no, my granny made it best, mama made it best." But knowing that you're a food historian, can you help us understand why white people put raisins in the potato salad? And
Listen, the devil's a liar. I mean, look, something is funny because everybody, most people know my work, know I'm African American and Jewish. And I had to get used to like Ashkenazi Jewish potato salad, which is actually Russian. They put peas and carrots in their potato salad,
yeah, yeah.
which is, so if I make potato salad for a mixed crowd, I
Mhm.
make a black version and I make their version, which I can make better.
Okay.
Theirs is white. Mine it has yellow in it because yellow. So I know, but my chef brother Harold never puts mustard in his. I
Interesting.
put the mashed up egg like my grandmother and mother did, and
Hmm.
paprika and mustard. Yeah,
Yeah.
there's a certain color to it, and I think the color factor is what makes our food different.
Ah.
Not everything, but certain things. But you're exactly right about the nostalgia point. It really, everybody thinks that their people make things the best way because we've become used to it. There's the comfort of having somebody else cook it for us and have to slave over no pun intended, over the food.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that's really what it is when it comes down to, for example, macaroni and cheese. I can't stand these macaroni and cheese recipes online or on the shows where it's like bechamel and breadcrumbs on top because our macaroni and cheese, as far as I'm concerned, is an egg custard.
Yo, wait. Time out, time out. This is
Come on,
brilliant. We're about to get really deep, deeper than
come
I
on,
thought we were about to get. Actually, we were going to close the episode asking you for a mac and cheese recipe, but damn it, let's just do it now.
her.
Let us have it. Like, what is the best way to prepare that dish? You said that
Now with breadcrumbs.
not with breadcrumbs. Why is that? Texture? Hold on there.
Texture, but also there's something to this, okay? Our, how do I say this? It's the color, it's also the fact that our food has certain values, like it
Mm,
communalizes. Black
mm.
food communalizes. We don't make it's like somebody heard you sometimes look into another culture's window and you find a better way to express something. And someone said the other day ago something about Filipino food doesn't have measurements for one person because the expectation is you will eat it as a family, as a household.
Uh-huh.
The foods that we adopted after slavery, okay, um, because they have to be eaten fresh or refrigerated. We didn't have refrigeration until the 20th century.
Yeah.
Or if we had them, they had to be made very fresh early in the morning when it was cool. That they didn't just cook in the early part of the day because they wanted a heads up on the day. It was because it was a cooler part of the day.
Ah, uh-huh.
Okay, remember we're predominantly 80-90% of us were Southern people living in those climates. The bottom line is that like my macaroni and cheese, which by the way, you can find my mother's macaroni and cheese recipe in my James Beard award winning book, The Cooking Gene, for which I
Yes.
was the first African American awarded book of the year. Thank you so much. And also double awarded on the media side.
Yes.
There is my mom's recipe, which is very sacred to me. But also recipes like our apple crisp. We put several types of cheese in ours, but it's all cheddar. The different kinds of cheddar.
Mm-hmm.
um, if and I did not put in the one secret ingredient, but I will tell you what it is. And
Oh,
I'm not
real, real
I'm not gonna
creative.
lose points in this. I hope, but a little chunk of Velveeta. If you ask every black mom and auntie, they
Little
tell
chunk
you,
of
yeah,
Velveeta. Hold on, I literally have my mother sitting here. She had to listen in on your interview, Michael.
huh,
I have my mother sitting in the studio right now because she was just dying to listen to you speak today.
yeah, yeah,
Here is my Velveeta. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
a
We
little
were
chunk of Velveeta, not a lot, because it's
a little bit.
and a lot of extra sharp cheddar.
Ah.
But you know what? But I made ours very rich. A little butter, well, a little butter, eggs, of course, because it's like a custard, right?
Uh-huh.
But if you want to make it real rich, and this is not everybody's thing, you don't have to do it. I put a little peak of cream cheese in there, and I put a little
Oh.
cream of sour cream in there. You don't have to. My mom didn't. My mom did sour cream every once in a while, just a little something. It wasn't like a you could leave it or you could, but when
Yeah,
you put
no
it in, it's
doubt.
very rich and
Okay.
very creamy. But these were also things, for example, I wonder if your mom nods on this. So, what about this is the old school black lasagna. I didn't know till I was in my 20s that ricotta went in lasagna because,
You're
like
not
many
kidding.
cottage cheese, because we didn't have access to ricotta.
Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
So we would put cottage cheese in. And by the time I learned about ricotta, I was like, I've actually never made it the old way again. But I mean, if for nostalgia's sake, that's in my mind. Also, brown sugar and spaghetti.
Okay. First there's just sugar and spaghetti, period, which Ma, that's not in our bloodline. We don't do that, right? That's
No.
no, there's not a but then also the pairing of spaghetti with catfish. But first, brown sugar and spaghetti.
Okay, a
What?
tablespoon or a teaspoon or two of brown sugar and spaghetti is about the fact that the canned tomatoes that we often use are acidic. It's not supposed to make it taste sweet. It's supposed to balance out the fact that you get those tinny, metallic, and bitter flavors from canned tomatoes. God knows how long they've been sitting in the can. You
Mm-hmm,
see what I'm
mm-hmm.
saying? So
Yeah.
it's about adjustment. It's got nothing to do with making it taste sweet, but some of our folks have been misled to believe what was that fool name? The one I don't like, Boosie.
Yes.
With like a cup of sugar and spaghetti. Oh, come on, father.
Yeah. Like
It's
he's
the
making
same thing,
Kool-Aid.
right? It's the same thing with macaroni and cheese. Some of the cheeses may taste a little bit more bitter or whatever. The little bit of sugar is not. It's not a seasoning. It's an adjustment. You shouldn't
Mm,
even be able to really taste it as a separate element. You shouldn't be able to say this tastes sweet.
yes.
You should be able to, in your mind, this tastes balanced.
Mm-hmm.
You know
Mm-hmm.
what I'm saying? So people got to. I've seen. Look, I saw somebody put sugar in some daggone greens. I almost lost my mind. Like,
I
okay, I'll tell you a little secret. So for
yeah.
me, I make greens all kind of different ways. But if I make it just for me and nobody else, I'll either use smoked turkey or I
Mm-hmm.
make a meatless and I use lime juice like they do in Brazil, like our people did in Brazil. Because
Mm-hmm.
collard greens are also Afro Brazilian food.
Uh-huh.
But if I have collards that are not frostbitten, which means they're going to taste sweeter and richer, I'll have to take a little bit of lime juice, and then I put about 2 teaspoons of coconut or palm sugar, right?
Uh-huh.
Coconut sugar, which is low glycemic, but also makes good with the pot liquor, and it tastes balanced. It doesn't taste sweet or sugary. It tastes more. It tastes like it's almost like a rich coffee or tea kind of like or
Mm-hmm.
brothy kind of flavor to it.
Yeah.
But that's just me. That's just me.
That's
Now sugar and grits. I'm gonna hurt your feelings because in Africa, when they
no.
eat gari,
No. No.
when they eat gari, my brother, when they chop gari, you go to
No.
Ghana, you go to Niger, you go to Salonde. The kids,
The
they
kids.
put sugar in the gari.
Okay, but once we become adults, we put the way of things of a child, right?
Oh, wow, scripture,
Wait,
scripture.
hold on. Okay, now this is deeply hurt my feelings. Wait, this there's a history to this. There's some
Yes,
history.
and also in Senegal, they also put adults and children, put a little bit of sugar or honey in their what is the thing called? It's the porridge that you eat in the morning. Chede, the
Oh,
millet porridge,
okay,
and it's like
okay,
grits.
okay.
Gari is like grits, and the millet porridge chede is like grits. So yeah,
Hmm.
it's a part of us. There's also another factor here we're not thinking about. If you are in the pre-industrial world, you're not, and you're a peasant, you're not drinking coffee every day.
Interesting.
You feel me? You
Ah.
don't have you have these long days of labor without much quick energy.
Mm-hmm.
So molasses was what our great great grandparents would have used, either sugarcane molasses or sugar molasses, and then processed sugar later, which of course has its own deleterious history.
Yes.
But that sugar was important. Back in the day in Britain and Scotland, those women, those that Charles Dickens era of women over
Hmm.
there who were working in the early factories, their fuel was tea with a lot of sugar in it.
Yes. Yeah.
And they
Yes.
had nothing else. They didn't have a lot of food to eat. They were undernourished. But you know what would keep them going? Caffeine and sugar.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's why tea was that such a it wasn't just 4 o'clock. It was all day long. Teacup after teacup of caffeine. So for our people, you talk about Louisiana. You know how the one version of the candied sweet potato was invented. Well, in sugarcane growing areas, the men who did that work for 18 hours at a time. Can you imagine? Hot, steamy, and dangerous, very dangerous. What
Mm.
they would do is they would bring a cast iron pot, a duchy, with sweet potatoes in it. And all you had to do was spoon out some of that molten hot sugar water
Mm.
over those yams, as we would call them. And then you know what that sugar water does to your body.
Yeah.
It would basically burn you, deform you.
Mm.
So that hot sugar water over those yams means 20, 30 minutes. I got a
You ready?
very steaming hot dinner cooked to the bone, middle of that yam, that's going to give me energy.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So we have to think about these foods. And I know we often talk about the health thing as well. And in context, those folks were walking everywhere. They were working physically.
Ah,
They
yeah.
weren't eating these things just because they were delicious. They were eating because they were eating, like Elijah Muhammad once said, eating to live, not living to eat.
Sustenance. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. I think it's something that we have to keep in awareness is that we are different. Have different parts of our people. What if, there is Louisiana Creole and Cajun, and then
Mm-hmm.
there's the black people who came to Louisiana during the antebellum period who absorbed elements of that culture. Then,
Mm-hmm.
of course, there's North Louisiana versus South Louisiana, right?
It's
Totally
totally
different.
different. Yeah.
And then there's black people in um, the mountains. There are black Appalachians. There's black Ozark people.
Mm.
There's black people. What I find most fascinating, and as I move more towards our own time in my work, is the cuisine of the central part of America. We're talking about Illinois, Missouri, Kansas, Nebraska,
Mm-hmm.
etc. Because it kind of like caught all the people, that were moving, and there were exodusters, right? Who were
Yes.
trying to find freedom. There were people who would only go so far north. They would only go so far north as up to St. Louis or East St. Louis, right? Or
Mm-hmm.
they would go to Chicago up from Mississippi, and there's great migration patterns. But essentially, what our culinary story begins with are 100 odd groups brought from Africa, and of course we know now that those groups carried with them pretty common and pretty consistent culinary traditions. Okay,
Okay.
so
Wait, like,
let
yeah. What are some of
go
those?
ahead, go ahead.
No, no. I'm just curious. What are some of those that we transport
Okay,
over with us?
let's talk about that. So we have the Senegambians who had millet, rice, sorghum, other grains, fonio,
Mm.
and then we have the people who were um, the center of the rice growers. My Mende and Temne ancestors on my mom's side and my paternal grandfather's side, paternal side. And there's the interesting part. If you get your DNA done and you trace your ancestry back to the Low Country, South
Mm-hmm.
Carolina, Georgia, Florida, and you have a female result, and it's from those rice growing people, there's no accident in that because the women themselves
Uh-huh.
were the primary rice cultivators. The men helped to get the land, make the dams and dikes necessary to release tidal water.
Hmm.
Which, by the way, the skill they brought to South Carolina and Georgia, it's left a mark on the land so deep that you can see it from outer space.
Wow.
Okay, thousands, and then more land was moved to make the rice plantations than was used to build the Great Pyramids of Giza. The women who were brought for a very specific reason, because they could cultivate and they could also um, process the rice accurately.
Mm.
Otherwise, it would have just been a broken mess. Okay,
Hmm.
and so because of that, the majority of people with those Mende, Timne, Gola, Kisi, other groups that come from the Sierra Leone and Liberia today,
Okay.
the majority results are female. Yeah, yeah. It's a direct link. And those women, by the way, were responsible in 1776. The 12 richest men in the colonies of Britain.
Hmm.
Um, um, 10 were South Carolina rice planters whose wealth was directly related to the black women who they had bought and imported and kidnapped from Sierra Leone and Liberia
Wow.
and Senegal and Gambia and beyond, and Guinea-Bissau. So if you're hearing this recording and you're watching us and you have done African ancestry some other company and you got those results, that's not just any history. It's a very direct and very powerful. It goes directly back to the 1750s to about the 1770s. You
Ooh.
can you can in your mind follow that line. Okay, so quickly we're going to move on to part of Cote d'Ivoire and then Ghana and then Togo and Benin, that and to Nigeria. It's yam country. So now it's cassava that competes
Ah.
with yam, but yams fufu, right? And I Hmm.
Hmm.
got to tell you, I went to my many trips to Africa. I remember the first time I had fufu, and I thought I was going to be all bad and black. Okay, so they gave me this fufu. First of all, Nigeria is not cool. It is 99 degrees of complete humidity or above, and they
Yeah.
have me eating this food with my hand, and I'm like, okay. I thought fufu was like mashed potatoes. Mm-mm-mm-mm. Fufu, as you well know, is it doesn't. You don't eat fufu. Fufu eats you,
Yes.
and
It's.
you put your hand it right. You put your hand in this hot, boiling fufu, and then you have to like do this thing, and it's you can't chew it. You just kind of falls down your throat
Oh
with
wow.
the sauce or whatever. And
Yeah.
I was like, wait a minute, this was not what I was. I thought I was gonna be down. I was gonna be, and I was not ready. And it's gloppy, and you have to
Mhm.
understand. This is you can have 2, 3 Ghanaian dudes, 2, 3 Igbos or Yorubas, uh, beanies, the phone, the Eves, and they eat the fufu, and the guys, and they eat the fufu, and next thing you know, it's like this whole bowl is gone.
Wow.
And for me, it was like impossible. I went back to jollof rice real fast. You keep going down, right? Keep going down the coast. You have more yams in Cameroon, and then you should get more cassava in Central Africa.
Yes. Yes.
Okay, cassava replaces millet and sorghum, and then of course the funny thing is that corn also comes into play in many African countries,
Mm.
and the Congolese, also my ancestors, they called it the millet of the Portuguese.
Huh.
And the Ghanaians said the same thing, but they didn't say Portugal. So they said, for example, this is a really fun fact for you: the people who were living in Ghana, the Akan, the Tree speakers, their word for white person is Abroni, which comes from the word for Aburo. And Aburo is the word for corn, and it's the white man's millet. So yeah, man. And just like the Igbo called sweet potatoes, white people yams.
What?
Yeah, man. Yes.
Oh.
Yes. And so the word in tree became shortened for to obroni, which comes from aburo. So even knowing these words is an act of liberation, reconnection, resistance, right? Because we were never supposed to know this.
Mm-hmm.
We were never supposed to reclaim any of this, and that was part of the plan. If you don't like, "Oh, that's far fetched," think about what's going on right now with Black history
Mm. Oh my
and
God.
knowledge of self, right?
Yes.
The very idea that we're not supposed to know is part of anti-liberation, anti-resistance, anti.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Thinking about that, knowing, and thank you so much for sharing that broad breadth of history with us. I am curious to know about just certain pervasive myths that have kind of endured over the
Mhm.
years, myths particularly around Black food ways, and some myths that claim that Black American dishes are actually like American staples. You've already revealed the African roots of so many different staples today, but I'm curious, what kind of pervasive myths around African food ways, Black culinary history do you find most pervasive today?
The first and foremost is that there's such a thing as slave food.
Speak on that. That's heavy. That's
Slave food didn't exist.
mm,
I mean, in the sense of, I think a lot of us have, we're going to go deep on this one.
I'm
I think
ready.
a lot of us need to understand the material culture of the enslaved was not the same as the enforced impoverishment that many of us have lived in our own lives.
Mm,
I know people think there's a direct link. It really isn't. Because you know what? Like I said, colloquial and discretionary. Somebody could be living, as we used to say, high on the hog in one spot,
mhm,
but right down the road, complete abasement. Like you might be, oh, this isn't so bad. I'm here as long as I stay out of the eye of these oppressors and do my thing, I'm good. And then right down the road, somebody is living, you know, off of nothing,
yes.
malnourished, incapable of really, I often say that the average enslaver had a mentality of the greatest amount of work for the least amount of calories.
Mm,
And that includes pregnant women.
mm,
You know, it
mhm,
the creation of our food depended upon communities that had agency and owned their foodways. So you have to think about the demographics of enslaved people. By the time we get to 1820, things are kind of set in terms of culture of American slavery. Okay, which
mhm,
is a long time. You think about how long that is from 1619. That's 2 centuries.
yes.
And so for most enslaved people, their material lives had nothing to do with their status as enslaved Negroes. Nope. If you could make it work, if you could find a way to do it, great. And the fact that enslaved people who were domestics were, they, God bless Malcolm, but he didn't know the South.
Mhm, mhm,
Domestic enslaved people were not dressed. Did not dress well because they were favored. They dressed well because it would have been an embarrassment.
mm,
Watch how gross this is. It would have been embarrassment to their holders, their keepers, their oppressors. They would talk about him. It was almost like I hate to use this analogy, but I'm gonna say it for people to understand
let's
the
get it.
19th century white mind, how messed up it was. Imagine in today's context, so you walk into somebody's house and a pit bull is like living in its own filth and chained up by the door.
Ah, gotcha.
You
Yeah,
get what I'm saying?
yeah, it speaks to their status, right?
There's a right speaks to their status. So it's not even about the humanity of the slaveholder. It's
Mm,
about what people think of the slaveholder. I know there's one account from one of my home states of Maryland, and it's Maryland, not Maryland people. And there was an enslaved teenage boy, which is particularly galling. And he was at the dinner table, but he had still had what they call the toe cloth
mhm,
on.
mhm.
It was clean, but the problem was it didn't fully cover his genital area.
Wow.
And so the white woman at the table makes all these disgusting remarks
Mm,
about this boy, the size of this boy's members or whatever. It's gross. And that just goes to show you how our people were, how weird enslavement was. So I know people think that everybody was kind of like living off of the slop or whatever
mm.
the slaveholder, the leftovers. That's nonsense.
Yeah, that's
First
the
of
yeah.
all, you can't give leftovers to 20 to 30 to 40, 100 people. They weren't eating that much. So it
Mhm,
depends on the agency and ownership of the enslaved. Our ancestors were not food desert people. They were give me make sure I have a garden people. They were I'm
mm,
gonna go hunting, fishing people. And the efficiency of it, okay? Let me give you a quick example. So say for example, there's one plantation in St. Mary's County, Maryland, where they have these big apple trees, pear trees, persimmon trees, whatever, right by the cabin. So this is what you do. You have the fruit tree. You gather the fruit. The fruit becomes snacks, dessert, whatever you want. And then because you have a fruit tree or nut tree, you know how you put your traps out for your rabbits.
Ah,
Deadfall trap captures
ecosystem.
them. Then dispatch them. Sometimes they would keep the animals for a little bit to clean them out.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Temporary pet. And then when they were ready for dinner, you would eat them, but also they would take the meat and hang it up in the carcass up in the fireplace, like a little smokehouse. You feel
Uh-huh.
me? And they
Preserving it.
keep the
Yeah.
pelt for various purposes. And the
Repurpose it.
fat of any
Yeah.
animal, not rabbits, but definitely raccoon and possum, they would save the fat for little lamps. There was
Yeah.
a real efficiency in everything they did. Okay, and also using those plants in medicinal ways is very important.
Mm.
So it's a myth that they were eating the cast offs. That there wasn't enough cast off to have,
Mm-hmm.
especially if their slaveholders were in small holdings. They ate what they probably ate this pretty much the same thing, but of course we had our own lives, and the goal was to associate with a larger community. Most of our ancestors, here's the deal: most white people did not have the big plantation, but most black people lived in holdings of 20 or more. Otherwise, we
Mm.
wouldn't be a people. We had to have children and family structure, and our family structure was um, uh,
Fluid.
extended and matriarchal.
Mm.
And also, we refused to marry our own kin. White
Mm-hmm.
people married their own kin to keep wealth in the family. Black people always married out because we understood the consequences of
Genetic.
marrying into of incestuous reproduction.
Mm-hmm.
All these things connected with food, everything, everything. Let's say your wife is pregnant. You gotta work twice as hard for her. You have to make sure she's getting the nourishment she needs because guess what? Slaveholders are going to give her less food because she works less. What did I say earlier? The
Mm.
greatest amount of labor for the least amount of calories. And in
Yes.
the African tradition that we come from, West Central African tradition we come from, you know, first of all, we came here thinking white people were eating humans and
Mm.
drinking blood and
Mm.
eating brains. When Africans saw that what the Portuguese ate, they ran like hell because they had never seen wine that was red before. All their wine was from palm trees and it was white. They had never seen cheese before. They thought they were eating the brains of people and olive oil. They thought they were actually exporting Africans to get the grease out of their skin. And they saw other foods they were eating. They thought they were eating human beings. So it's very you know how we grew up with the whole Tarzan nonsense and the Africans are the cannibals and the Africans thought that about the Europeans, and it was actually a way of processing the trauma of
Mm-hmm.
how did a people get to be a product.
Yes, indeed.
That kind of thing. And
Yeah.
also one more thing people believe that's kind of like off is that we took the scraps and we made a delicacy out of it. That's something what's imperative is that we were peasants. We were essentially a peasant class. And so what we did in Haiti, in Brazil, in Jamaica, in Barbados, and St. Vincent and Tobago, and Virginia, and Maryland, North Carolina, Mississippi, Texas, Florida, beyond,
Mm-hmm.
was that even Massachusetts, New York, when there was still slavery there, was that we understood the value of absorbing, finding ourselves in other people's cuisine and culture. So it wasn't so much that people taught us or they
Mm-hmm.
shared with us. It was
Mm-hmm.
like, okay, I am in this exile, I'm in this hell, I'm gonna make it work.
Mm-hmm.
Did I ever tell you D about the time that the devil called the Lord?
No, I don't think you told me about this one,
I need
Michael.
to talk to you about how the devil called the Lord.
Okay.
So one day the devil called the Lord and he said, God, I gotta talk to you. And the God said to the devil, said, Devil, look, I got my own problems. These black folks up here, they getting barbecue sauce in their robes. They keep praising and shouting all day and all night. I can't get no rest. And then the devil said, Lord, hold on real quick. 15 minutes later, Devil comes back on the phone and says, Lord, I gotta go. The Negro just installed air conditioning. You get the
We
point of
know
that
what
joke.
to work, right?
We even in hell we gonna make it. We gonna make it cool. We gonna chill out in hell, but we not gonna let you burn us.
Yes,
And that's
indeed.
what the enslaved people did all over the Americas, but especially our people in the American South.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for speaking to that culture of resilience, of innovation, ingenuity. These are things that get lost when we denigrate the food traditions that have survived, that we had to recreate, remix, that we benefit from today. So many people want to denigrate it as like slave food without understanding, again, the material conditions you just laid out for us. My goodness. Now, actually that segues right into a segment where we really want to know more about your practice.
Okay.
Michael, one thing that really sets you apart from traditional historians, educators, and culinary folks is just the way that you embrace experiential or immersive learning. And you really take that to another level by performing or reenacting the role of enslaved laborers,
Right.
cooks during slavery. And you're actually in the same plantation kitchens that they were in. You're walking the same land that they walked. So walk us through one of your rituals that you might
Okay.
perform to prepare for. Would you call it a reenactment?
I would call it interpretation because
Mhm.
reenactment implies that we're recreating a scene or a moment or, piecing together something from history. Like, so my colleagues who work at Colonial Williamsburg, for example, will sometimes do plays or things, but they're heavily researched. There may not be every exact word, but it's the substance of an issue. Like, for example, there's a small piece that they do in one of the houses called "The Perfect Gift,"
Okay.
and it's about a black young woman who has lived her and worked her whole life with her mistress, and up
Mhm.
until the point where she gets married, she doesn't think of her as her slaveholder or whatever. She thinks of her as her friend until the mistress goes, "I'm gonna take you with me, but you gotta leave the kid behind."
Oh my lord.
This actually happened.
Yeah.
And it was the cause for this black woman to basically be like, you know what? I'm out. Her
Wow.
child versus her mistress, who she thought was her friend, who would never treat her like that. I'm out.
Hmm.
Me, I am, like I said, piecing together these recipes. For example, Charles Ball, who often gets forgotten next to Douglas or Solomon Northup.
Hmm. Hmm.
It's called 50 Years in Chains, and he talks about his life enslaved from Maryland to South Carolina to Georgia, and the several attempts he made to escape, including the last final attempt, which he became free. And the sad part is that he tried to find his wife and children and found that they were gone.
Mm.
It's a really heartbreaking narrative, but he tells you a lot of details about what that time of American history was when slavery ramps up.
Hmm.
We have to remember something. Slavery was not the same institution in 1619 that it was in 1820, that it was in 1860, and
Hmm.
that it was as it dies out by 1870. Notice I gave you 5 more years after emancipation,
Yeah. Yeah.
right?
You could extend that.
So
Think about Jim
Charles
Crow.
Ball talks about this dish they made with pork and sweet potatoes and herbs, he says.
Okay.
So I got to piece together, okay, what pork, what kind of heritage breed would they have been using?
Yeah.
What's approximate? Sweet potatoes. They probably don't think about the orange ones. Think about the ones like the Japanese ones that are red on the outside, white on the inside, very
Uh,
starchy.
yeah.
Not
Yeah.
sweet, but very starchy. Herbs. What were the common herbs? Well, definitely sage, definitely hot. When they say pepper, most enslaved people, black pepper was exotic.
Ah, wow.
It was something that you had to go to like barter for or steal to
Wow.
get or buy if you could manage that. So red pepper, cayenne pepper, various types of hot peppers that were grown in the community: cherry pepper, bird pepper, fish pepper. Okay,
Mm.
great. And then comes, maybe even parsley or purslane. All those were also called herbs. Those are like the things we call weeds today.
Uh-huh.
Wild greens. And so I'm putting this recipe together among many by just peeling back the layers, looking at what's written, what's published, looking at what people describe, and also thinking about looking at narrative after narrative and asking people for what are the colors here, what's the temperature, what's the this, what's the that. Okay.
Wow.
We always have onion in our food, right? So they had ramps, had wild onion, they had cultivated onion.
Mm-hmm.
So for me, that's the first thing. The next thing is pouring libation. I learned the hard way as I was putting on the clothes of the replica clothes of our ancestors and interpreting. I'm gonna just go where my heart is. I was interpreting them, but also I was doing ancestor reverence
Mm.
by interpreting them. And one of my things is to always try to know or learn the names of the enslaved cooks and their families. And one of the first things that I do is I pour libation and I say, you know what? I'm here to tell your story. I
Mm-hmm.
love you. You're now my family. And I got to tell you something. When I first started doing this, and I would just kind of waltz in and waltz out, and I would feel particularly angry or aggrieved, like sad or whatever. And then a friend of mine explained to me that you're like a door. They're walking through you, and they're thrilled that somebody is mentioning their name and talking about them. Years they've had no one to call on them, no one to wish them peace,
Mm-hmm.
no one to. And by the way, every ancestor ain't an angel.
Hey, that's a word.
Some
Yeah.
of them are locked in their anger and their bitterness, and
Yeah.
you obviously so. Why would I'm being killed for no damn reason? I'm being tortured for no reason. I didn't come to this plane of existence to live in hell.
Yeah.
Why did you do this to me? Right? That kind of anger. I mean, I literally had them in my head going, I didn't ask for this. I don't this was not cute. This was not fun.
Mm.
And I have to okay, so what I do is I have to open that door and close it. So I walk into the space, I pour libation, I feel what I feel when I'm teaching people and talking to people. And people sometimes ask me really poignant questions. Like I was doing one presentation and talking about the role of ethnicity in the colonial period, et cetera. And there was an Asian young girl who was adopted by two white parents. And she said to me, where would I have fit?
Ah.
And that was just that it was devastating because I answered her question the best way I could, but having to explain to her that whiteness was the default as it is now, but in a different way.
Yeah.
Or when black children come in, it's very charming because the first how our kids are when they don't want to be someplace, they just the body just does this thing, right?
Yeah.
And so I know I have 20 seconds to engage black kids.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Mm-hmm.
give them something to do, or I talk to them and I say, hey. And then by the time I'm good and done, they're like, I don't want to leave. I want to see what the man is doing. And, da, da, da.
Oh yeah.
and I tell them, I said, young kings, young queens, remember something. We were not born to be enslaved. We were not always enslaved people. We weren't always kings and queens either.
That's a word.
But but we were craftsmen, we were poets, we were astronomers, we were farmers, we were foragers, we were warriors, we were princesses, we were spiritual people,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
And I don't want you to forget that. And the black kids in particular, will be like, "Oh my God, he does that. He's doing that thing that I saw grandma do. They cooked the thing she made, and grandpa did that." And that's when my eyes light up and my soul lights up because I know for the first time these kids are connecting with their heritage and they
Yes.
see it to be proud of.
What the
And I tell them, like, remember everything that you've been taught. Ask a lot of questions. Don't be shy to ask the questions. Ask your grandparents, your aunties, your uncle, people, even the people in the community. How did you grow up? What were things like when you were younger? what do you remember? What was told to you, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And they just leave there with this bright smile, and I always get hugs. Black
Yes.
kids always give me hugs,
Well,
and yeah.
no, no, it makes me curious about the racial dynamics for the interpretations that you stage. And
Ooh,
thank you so much
ooh.
for laying out just the ancestral veneration aspect of the sacred work that you're doing. But it does make me curious. Have you encountered any critiques of your interpretations? And let me just say it plain. How do white folks receive this? So you spoke about young girl, young Haitian
Yes.
girl. So I'm curious. Just how do white people receive this?
So it depends. A
Okay.
lot of them are humbled.
Ah.
And they
Okay.
say things like, I've never had to think about it that way before. I've never thought. One woman was from Savannah, and she said, I didn't know that okra soup and oyster this and peanut soup and this and that and the other and red rice was African.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And she was like, why didn't I never know this?
Well,
And I said, because you weren't taught that you were a beneficiary of African culture
mhm.
and that you still live it. Now, the worst I've ever gotten. One time I was at a plantation site in Virginia. It was plantation Christmas, and which isn't as like naive as it sounds, and especially where I was. And I remember that the pot kind of slipped and some water fell out, and these neckreds laughed at me, and I was angry. And that was one of those where I was just like the angels was channeling some serious stuff through me.
Mhm.
And instead of letting it pass, because they thought I was bumbling. Okay.
Mm. Mhm.
All
Mhm.
right. So the first thing, the immediate thing I said was that wasn't funny. There were like 30 people in the room who were behind that rope. So that wasn't funny. You know why it wasn't funny? Because there was a black man who was a cook on a plantation in the West Indies, and his maniacal slaveholder, I said this in front of kids too.
Ooh.
His maniacal slaveholder threw him in an oven and baked him alive. And when her guest requested to see the cook, she took him to the oven where his bones were charred. So you laughing at me in this space reminds me of the people who harmed my ancestors. And you know what? They all like filed out in silence. And I was like, good. And then one of the docents, who was an old white woman, she said to me, you don't have to tell them all about the cooking and everything. Just tell them that you're the cook and be done with it. I
Wow.
said, if you don't get back up in the big house when you still got a chance,
Well, you still
you
got a
know,
chance.
right? And then there are other people who like they're like, I want to cook with you, and
Mm.
I said, sure. And then like I mean, I have these really cathartic, magical Negro moments where these white people will sit there and would cry with me. I'm
Wow.
not crying; they're crying. I'm like,
Yeah.
why are you crying? And
Yeah.
they're just like, I didn't know how difficult this was. I didn't know how much work it was. And then it always comes out that they had a woman who worked for their family.
Yeah.
And they start talking about how like they took for granted that she
Mm.
gave so much of her life and time to them and she had a family of her own.
Mm.
And they really get into a groove of just being like, this
That's
ain't
so
right.
fascinating.
Now, I had a MAGA woman come up to me one time.
Oh.
You
Okay.
get ready. You need to get good and ready in your seat for this one. Be it leather, wood, or cloth. She said to me, I know what it's like to be enslaved. I'm an evangelical Christian in America.
How do
Okay.
you especially in this context? How did you respond, Michael?
First of all, I almost gave her a Claire Huxtable readout, like when Elvin would mess up. But instead, um, someone I'm very close to, who is white, said, "Excuse me, but I think you need to leave
Mm. Okay. Somebody intervened.
because this is you. You have no idea
Yeah.
what this man's ancestors and people still go through. You're not aware,
Mm-hmm.
and what you said was wrong.
Mm.
And you know, you have your feelings, but those feelings are wrong."
Yes, indeed. Yes, indeed.
And I was like, "That's it. You do the heavy lifting. You be the one to tell her what's up, and because she's not going to receive it the same way from me, even if I'm very sharp and poignant in what I have to say,
Yeah.
she gonna
Yeah.
hear you. Her and her husband heard him in
Wow.
that way, and that's why I tell people all the time, we didn't get out of this by ourselves, but we
Mm-hmm.
have to cultivate and educate our allies and friends and family who are not us
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
to be those abolitionists.
Absolutely.
You
Absolutely.
know,
You're already
if
staging
necessary.
this heavy work during your interpretation. So appreciate the white allies who do intervene and do know their role. Thank y'all.
But you know what? If you're not an ally and you're not a friend, I have a beautiful, wonderful chocolate cake recipe for you.
Oh,
I'll even
no.
make it myself.
Wait. Oh no, no. I got two more questions for you, Michael. Just two
Bring
more, and
it.
then I'm gonna let you get up out of here. I know you got a lot to do. Very busy, important person. First is gonna be a little bit of a not even a heavy question, but a personal question. And second is a lighthearted, fun question we want to leave folks with.
Sure.
First question, I'd be remiss not to mention this, but would love to know more, just a bit more about your concept of kosher soul cuisine.
Okay.
Um,
Cool.
and relatedly, but like, how do your multiple intersecting identities kind of influence your relationship with food in general?
Right. So, kashrut, just like halal. I did a beautiful story a couple years ago. We had a black writer, me. We had a black photographer, black food stylist, and black interviewees about a halal cookout in Philly.
Whoa.
And I actually grew to love and really appreciate the halal chefs and caterers in that community. We have a lot in common. Ben Bynum has a beautiful restaurant up there. He is practicing Muslim. I'm Jewish. We have a lot in common. Our food ways are not exactly the same, but
Hmm.
there are a lot of similar patterns. Philly has a large Black Orthodox Muslim community,
Mm-hmm.
large.
Absolutely.
um and it's really important, but also there are Black Jewish communities, and there are also Black Jews like myself who are in both Black and mainstream Jewish communities. And kashrut takes out some more tastier elements. Like, I've never had catfish. I've never eaten it. I don't know what catfish tastes like. I've made catfish stew many times. And what I'll do is, not in my house, but at sites and stuff, I'll taste it to the point where the catfish goes in, and somebody else tastes it. Yeah.
Wow.
But typical Shabbat meal for me when I'm cooking and I'm making for other people is matzo meal fried chicken. Um let's see. Peach rice kugel. So it's like
Ooh,
rice pudding with peaches in it, but it's
ooh.
also kugel, which is like Eastern European style sweet casserole or pudding.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm.
Um, I make my mother's apple crisp, but I make it with meat with margarine
Okay.
and other things. I love jollof rice or red rice, or a good beef stew, or like a berbere from Ethiopia. The Ethiopian Jews brought berbere with them everywhere they went.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So it's a mixture of all different. My home synagogue in Maryland was Moroccan and Persian and Syrian and Tunisian. So I
Wow.
learned from the women there how to cook kraime, which is a kind of a spicy fish dish, um, with like tomatoes and jalapenos and things like that, and
Mm-hmm.
onions and bell peppers. And I learned how to make albondigas, which are meatballs, and how to make things like, my favorite is cigars. Cigars are basically like beef egg rolls.
Okay.
So yeah,
Okay.
all that stuff. And of course, I grew up with challah and brisket and matzo balls and things. So I make matzo ball gumbo. I make matzo balls in yassa, which is a Senegalese sauce. I mix
Okay.
it all up. That's what we're gonna make at the pop up
Okay. Wait. The
for
matzo
for
ball gumbo is gonna be there too.
Yeah, man. I had a whole
Okay.
piece in the LA Times about that. I
Whoa.
made it for them. And I really try. And then I make fake stuff, like there's fake kosher shrimp, which aren't really shrimp.
Mm-hmm.
And I make that too. and I just try to mix everything up. Going to West Africa all these different times. I've been to Africa now 8 times, and 4 of those trips have been culinary trips that I've brought other black chefs on.
Oh.
And I shouldn't say this too loud, but when I hear them go, I can't afford to go. I'm like, no, you going.
Mm.
You've got to go. And then next thing I know, I dig in my wallet or I go ask somebody else. Shout out to Padma Lakshmi who gave us a significant donation one time for our chefs to go to Africa.
That's
And
amazing work.
we really want them to have that experience because the education isn't just in the books or TV or internet. It's actually going to the place. It helps promote not only love and understanding between our communities, but helps increase the money in the community. There was a woman in Cameroon. I call her Grandma Pepe, Pepper grandmother,
Okay.
and I never forget this. Like I bought this really. She had this really good hot pepper she grew and ground, and she's sitting on this like you know little bench. Beautiful, beautiful woman in her 80s, and I was like, I want some pepper. She's like, I'm like here, and I kind of you in West Africa you don't just go like that. You kind of crumble and put it in.
Yeah.
She looks at the $20 bill, well, the equivalent of $20, and she was just like, God bless you. And I said, Grandma, I said, no, no, no. I said, this is a premium product. She says, it would take me a week and a half to earn this much.
Wow.
So
That's
we want to keep that
awesome.
positive vibe going. If you've never been to the continent, please go. Please go. Take these young boys and these young women with you.
Mm-hmm.
Show
Mm-hmm.
them. Show them there is more to the world. The world is wider. The world is theirs. They are citizens of the world. They're daughters and sons of Africa,
Yes.
and they need to be present in the making of a new Africa.
Yes,
And they need
indeed.
to when they come back home, they're gonna look around. They're gonna be like, especially if you're from New Orleans or Baton Rouge, you would go to Africa and you'd be like, wow, these are faces I've seen my whole life. And then you come back and you're like, wow, those are faces I saw all over Africa.
Yeah.
Right? It happens to everybody who's ever been.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's my little personal plug. So that's part of the work. It's honoring the ancestors, teaching about them. It's teaching people how to cook the dishes, how to cook the food. It's also going back to the continent. I hope to get to the Caribbean and Brazil in the next couple years,
Mm-hmm.
and really just absorb all that history and all. But it's not just for me; it's for all of us. It's also to give honor to our diasporic cousins.
Yes.
We're all in this together. We're all in this together, and that's what makes me love and appreciate being of African descent. I can't imagine being anything else
Yes.
because I know how not just how dope we are, but just how beautiful we are, but also how like strong and how the spiritual energy that we have is it's not an issue of superiority, it's an issue of
Unbounded.
clarity
Yeah.
that I think that the creator has given us as the first to walk this planet.
Thank you for that word. Thank you for that word, Michael. We only got about 2 minutes, maybe 2.5 minutes left. I'm sorry, producers. I gotta sneak this in. So you mentioned the matzo ball gumbo, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Um, so am very particular about gumbo recipes. We talked about this earlier, nostalgia and whatnot.
Mhm.
I don't care. I'm from the place that invented it. I often, in my travels, come across different recipes for gumbo, and some feel more closely aligned with what I'm used to or what we're used to than
Mhm.
others. And I came across this one particular recipe, actually made by a somewhat famous actor who was on a beloved black sitcom in the early 90s. I'm not going to say his name, not going to say the show. He decides to make his gumbo with shark and zucchini. I saw your eyes. I saw your eye. Yes, yes. Okay. All I want to know, Michael, if folks do want to experiment with classic dishes, what tips do you have for them, so we don't end up with shark in our gumbo and
Don't
too
tell it
much
in
sugar?
public.
Oh, I'm sorry. What's that?
Don't tell it in public. Keep it to yourself.
Yeah.
I mean, inspiration is the word inspiration carries a lot of the load for us, right?
Mm-hmm.
The idea of inspiration, the idea of you know being you know carrying that work. But the other part of it goes like this. we're allowed to play around, but as long as we understand and tell people this is not traditional, this is my thing, my little project.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
It's all
Yeah,
good after that.
yeah, yeah. Keep your experiments to yourself. All right.
Right.
I appreciate that. Thank you so much, Michael. We got to have you back on.
Oh,
Folks, please check
absolutely.
out the Cooking Gene. Please go see them. Where are you going to be at this weekend? What's
In
happening?
Los Angeles, I'll be doing a dinner on 5/15 Kosher Soul pop up, and please buy and read Kosher Soul. They're like 60 recipes plus recipes in there, and menu ideas and food ideas, and references to other people's cookbooks. You can have the whole journey of it. But please support Kosher Soul. It's it's a really I'm not just because I wrote it, but because we need to understand all Black cultures,
Mm-hmm.
and this is definitely one I'm very proud of. And one of my favorite chapters, in fact, is the chapter with Chef Shabra, who's a Muslim caterer, and our dialogue between Muslim and Jew about how we eat, how we celebrate, how we make family, how we make tradition, is a really special part of that book. But it's a labor of love, and I'm the first African American to win the National Jewish Book Award, first Black person, period,
Yes,
to win
indeed.
any award, National Jewish Book Award. And there's a sister from Uganda who also won for her book the year I won. Yes.
Yes, yes, indeed. Thank you, Michael.
Thank
Until
you.
next time. Peace, y'all.
Peace.
That was the incredible Michael Twitty, food historian and author of The Cooking Gene. Be sure to check out his book to learn more about how you can continue reclaiming Black foodways. The book is one of my favorites, so be sure to check out The Cooking Gene if you haven't already. And remember, food is more than physical sustenance. It's also resistance. It's revolution. It's a pathway to find yourself and each other. How can you start using food as a tool for Black unity and liberation? Let us know. And if you found this conversation valuable, please share this episode on your social media. Be sure to tag us at We Are Push Black on IG and TikTok. At Push Black, we agree with Marcus Garvey when he said, "A people without knowledge of their past history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots." We believe telling empowering stories on Black life and history can build a more liberated Black future. Being here with us lets us know you probably feel like that's important too. You matter. Your choice to be here matters. It lets us know that you value this work, and you make Push Black happen with your contributions at blackhistoryyear.com. Most people do $5 or $10 a month, but everything makes a difference. Thank you for supporting the work.